All right, I think I'm live. Hello, guys. Thank you for joining my live stream today. And I wanted to do this live stream. Couldn't hear with this headphones. I wanted to do a live stream basically to answer some of your game engine development questions that you may have. So this is the plan for today, all right? I'm gonna go to Quora.com and I'm gonna answer some questions related to game engine development. Now, if you have never been on Quora before, basically it's a question and answer site where you can just post, any type of questions, and people with knowledge, they get to answer those, your questions basically. So it is a really cool site. Now, however, hey, Greenblade, how are you? I just basically started like less than a minute ago. So ASLH. Like I was saying, I'm going to go to Quora and I'm going to answer some questions related to game engine development. I haven't been on Quora for almost, I don't know, like a year. I stopped answering questions there for several reasons. Basically, I was very busy and other stuff that happened. But I've been getting, more notifications. People wanted me to answer some of those questions. So I'm going to answer 3 questions on Quora, and then I'm going to answer 2 questions that I get to ask frequently, and then I get your questions, and we can go from there. Hey, Alex, how are you? So let me switch to my main screen here, and I'm going to go to Quora. So this is Quora if you've never been there. It's a really cool site. You should check it out. And I'm going to go to some of the answers that I've been getting. Let me go to answers later. So let's see. One of the questions that I found interesting was this one. That how will you explain what a game engine is to someone who has no idea about them? And when I read this question, it reminded me of my mom, because she would ask me, what are you doing, with all of your free time? What are you working on? And I would try to explain to her that I was developing, a game engine, right? And she never really understood it because she never played video games and she's not technical at all, right? So let me open up my answer. So basically, this is how I would explain what a game engine is to someone who is not technical at all. Basically, a game engine is a toolbox, right? It's a toolbox that gives you the tools for you to develop any type of game that you want. And a good, metaphor would be like when you want to build a house. The tools that you need are the hammer, power tools, screwdriver, nails, wood, on and on, right? But no matter how many houses you build, right, the only tools that changes will be basically the wood, the roof, the flooring. But there are some tools that they never change, such as the hammer, the power tool, and on and on. So those tools, you can reuse them over and over again. So when you develop a game engine, right? When you develop a game, the same idea applies. There's no need for you to manufacture a new hammer for every single game. You can reuse it over and over and over. So basically, a game engine, if you want to explain this to someone, it provides a set of tools that allows the game developer to keep using them to develop different kind of games. Not just only one game, but different type of games. That's how I would explain this. So let me submit this question. And yes, Greenblade, I'm going to provide the links to all of this in the description right after I'm done with this live stream. Hold on, let me. Okay, go. Then let me answer the other one, which now is a little bit more complicated. What's the other one that I liked? Oh, this one. Is it possible to make an OpenGL graphics engine within 3 months from scratch? See, it's a short answer is I would find that very, very impossible to do. Why? Well, basically, especially if you're a newbie, right? If you're a newbie and you want to develop a graphics engine within 3 months, holy cow, that's gonna, no, I don't know. Well, basically because you need to understand or know a lot about linear algebra. You need to understand matrices and how transformations work. You need to understand about vectors and dot product and stuff like that. But on top of that, you also need to understand computer graphics theory, the OpenGL pipeline, the API itself, how to use the API, and then the shading language, like how to use shaders, and with your with the OpenGL API, so you can render characters on the screen. So just that understanding all of that takes quite a few months. For example, like for me, just to get the linear algebra concepts down took me more than I don't know, like a couple of months. And then understanding the OpenGL API and understanding the computer graphics theory, that was a nightmare to understand, right? And and let's assume that you are able to get all of that within a month. Okay, let's assume you're smart enough that you can get all of that. Well, your graphics engine, right, will require at least it's going to require the ability to render 3D models. It needs to support shadows, right? It needs to support 3D animations. It needs to render 2D images, buttons, sprites, fonts, skyboxes, and then particle system, right? All of that is going to take some time. And on top of that, you need to set up some time to do debugging and testing. So for you to develop something like that within 3 months, keeping in mind that you are a newbie, I find that to be a very tight schedule. So I don't know. Like for me, when I started, it took me literally more than 6 months or so. It took me a while to get the rendering engine working. So yeah, I don't know. It's gonna take you more than 3 months for sure. So let me submit this. Hey SLH, see you. So that's that one. Let me answer the other one that I wanted to answer. This one. How can I make a physics engine for games, and what are the steps to build one? So here's the thing, okay? To understand how to develop a physics engine, this is the key. You need to know that the main responsibility, the primary purpose of a physics engine is to integrate the equation of motions. That's the main purpose. That's the main goal, right? That's what you need to implement. And now, if you don't recall what the equations of motions are, basically, I know when you went to college, you read about the Newton's second law and the rotational force, which are these equations. Well, you need to integrate those equations, right? And when you integrate these equations, you're going to get two primary parameters that a game engine requires. That is the final velocity and the position of the object, right? So basically, if you have apply a force to an object, you can compute the velocity by integrating its acceleration, and then you can calculate the position by integrating the velocity. So that's the primary duty of a physics engine, to integrate the equation of motion. All right. Now, there is one little problem with all of this. All right. Computers, they cannot do integrals. You cannot do them, right? Computers cannot do that. So you need to use numerical integrations, and there are several of them that you can use. The Euler method is a very simple technique, but it's not that precise. You can still use it. It's not bad, but it's not precise. There's one more that is a bit more complicated that is known as the Runge-Kutta fourth order method. Again, it's a little bit more complicated, but it really, really provides a better approximation to the integral of the equation of motion, right? So that's basically what you need to work on. So if I had to summarize how can you make a physics engine? Well, you needed to implement a continuous loop which consists of the following steps. Number one, you need to identify all forces and moments that are acting on the object, right? Then you take the vector sum of all these forces and moments. Number three, then you solve the equation of motion for both the linear and the angular acceleration. And then the fourth step is that you need to integrate the acceleration with respect to time to find the linear and the angular velocity. And after you're done with that, you need to then integrate the velocity with respect to time to find the linear and the angular displacement. And you need to do that in a continuous loop. So every time you are applying a force to a character, you go through all of these steps, which you identify the forces, take the vector sum of all these forces, then you integrate the equation of motion. And once you get the velocity and the position, those two parameters, you use that basically to modify your space transformation matrix, which will be sent to the rendering to the GPU, which will create the illusion that your object is moving on and on. Now there are two really good books that I recommend you to get, and I'm providing the links here. They are the physics for game developers. That one is an amazing book. That book helped me develop the physics engine, and the other one is Game Physics Engine Development. Again, it's a really good book, but in my opinion, this one gave me more of a bigger overview, and this one really gave me all the tools to develop the physics engine. So give me 1 second here. All right, so I'm going to submit this question. And those are the ones basically that I wanted to answer today, on Quora. I got a bunch more that I wanted to, but I'm going to leave that for later. Now, I have two other questions that I wanted to answer that I tend to get often. So let me bring this up. Give me 1 second. All right. So you may be wondering, how much money does it take to develop your own game engine, right? Now, the most expensive items that you are going to need to buy to get will be books. Technical books, as you know, are very, very expensive, and you are going to need to buy a ton of them. To get you started, you need about like 6 books that for you to buy. And let me give you actually let me go to my website so you can know the type of books that you need if you are interested. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna go to my website here. Okay, so here are the books that I use to develop my game engine, right? Basically all of these books. You have the books for the math engine, the rendering engine, the physics engine. Now and then you also need some 3D modeling tools books that you need to, I recommend you to read on, to use. Books for the architecture. Basically, these are the books for to help you implement the game engine, like programming principles and best practices and everything. Now, when you're starting, you don't need to buy all of these books, right? Eventually you will need to get them, but in the beginning you don't have to buy these books. So the books that you need to get you started are basically the ones I outline here, almost at the end of the article. The 3D Math Primer, which is a book I strongly recommend. Then the OpenGL Super Bible, shaders, on and on. Now, for me to develop my game engine, I literally had to buy all of these books, right? I bought them, and that's the thing about game engine development. When it comes to books, it can get very expensive. So, I'll say about, I don't recall how much I have spent on this, but I'll say over $2,000 on books. I mean, keep in mind that a book on Amazon, a technical book, is no less than $50, so it can get very expensive. But I spent all of this money in a period of 5 years, right? So and aside from that, right, aside from the books, you don't really need to spend much. For example, I use Xcode to write the code, which is free. I use Git, which is free. I use GitHub, which is free. But I do pay like $7 a month for the hosting of my code and all. And then Blender. You need to use Blender to do your 3D modeling and to do the testing, basically to test if your 3D model will be able to be rendered by your game engine, right? So you're gonna use that quite often. And Blender is also free. Then I also use Sublime. Is that the name? Yeah, Sublime Text. I believe it's free, but I ended up supporting them, so I ended up paying. Or I don't recall. I do recall that they, I was using Sublime, and then I got a pop-up text saying, "Hey, will you pay like $80 for this?" And I paid it. I think it was like supporting the developers. I don't recall, but I ended up paying anyways. So type of that. Aside from that, how much money does it take to develop a game engine? Honestly, not that much. Not really, not that much. If you can find these books that I am mentioning right here, if you can find them, in your library, at a library, or at a used bookstore, it's not gonna be that much, seriously. However, this is the problem that here's the thing that you need to keep in mind though. Money wise, you don't spend that much. The problem is the opportunity cost. All right, I spent over 5 years developing my game engine, and I'm working on it during my free time. See, it's that opportunity cost, right? What could you have been doing instead of developing your own game engine? You probably could have been studying for something else, getting certification for, I don't know, something related to Linux, something, right, that could actually pay off in the future. That's the issue with developing your own game engine. It's the opportunity cost, the cost of you doing something that could be, give you something in return in the future. Now, I'm not saying that developing your own game engine is not a good thing. It is a great thing. I love it. This is my hobby, and I foresee myself doing this for a long time. But I also look back and think, I could have been, I don't know, getting my master, my master's in engineering, doing something else that probably could be making me more money. Who knows? So that's the thing. Okay, Harlex, I'm going to answer your question after I answer the next one. But That's a very interesting question. So the other question that I wanted to answer is what was the most difficult part of developing a game engine? Now, I've mentioned this before. The most difficult part of developing a game engine is the collision detection system. That is insanely complicated. It took me over a year to get it working. I literally worked so hard on getting that to work. And I honestly have to tell you this, I don't think the collision detection system in my engine is good enough yet. I actually decided to take a break before I go back and fix some issues that I have found. It is insanely complicated. So, but the real, how can I say this? What makes game engine development really hard is the fact that you may want to give up every single day, and that is the most complicated part of developing a game engine. Fighting your own, that inner voice in your head saying, give up. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through this? You could be doing something else that can make you more money in the future. So the most complicated part is basically your own fighting your own psychology, fighting that need that you want to give up, right? Waking up every day, going to Starbucks, or being in your room reading books, technical books for hours and hours, and just wanting to give up and still keep on going. So that is the hardest part. That is the thing that, if somebody doesn't develop their game engine because along the way they gave up, I understand them. And I was like, dude, I know how you feel. I've been there. That was hard. And to be honest with you, I actually quit developing the game engine for about 4 months. I couldn't take it anymore. I really couldn't take it. So I just stopped working on it. But, I was so in love with it that I had to come back and then do this. So, so the most complicated part of developing a game engine is not the technical part, not at all. It's actually you're fighting your own psychology. That is the part that, that can kill you. So those are the 5 questions that I wanted to answer. So now let me answer some questions that I have here on the how do you call this? The chat. There you go. All right. So how do you deal with the architecture of the engine, like in terms of graphics API abstraction, most especially when you switch from using OpenGL API for rendering to using Metal? All right. So one of the things that I did was to understand design patterns and to use them throughout my game engine, right? I literally try to read on design patterns as much as possible, because what I found out is that when you use them, your application, your game is going to be more modular. It's going to be flexible. It's going to be adaptable, right? Now, the key part here is modular, right? Because I used design pattern principles, I was able to basically just think of it as Lego pieces, right? I could just literally remove everything related to OpenGL and add the Metal API in it without having to modify anything around the game engine. So that's how I dealt with that issue of me wanting to use Metal or OpenGL. Actually, what you can do in your game engine, number one, use design patterns. I recommend them. And you can actually have it, implemented in such a way that you can use, for example, the strategy design pattern, so that it can somehow switch between, using OpenGL, Metal, Vulkan, and you can just keep adding more stuff to your game engine in such a modular way that you don't have to modify anything around it. You can just keep adding more stuff. And that's how I basically implement my game engine. I use a lot of design patterns. I can literally go and right now remove the particle system, and my game engine would work. And I can add it, I can put it back, and then I can add more stuff on top of the particle system, and I would not have to waste time debugging the other part of the engine, because everything is modular. Everything is like Lego pieces. You just keep stacking one onto the other, and that is what I recommend you to do. Do that. That will help you quite a lot. It's going to make things a lot easier, to be honest with you, as you keep making your game engine more complex and adding more features. So I really recommend you to do that. Actually, a good book on design patterns is this one. Now, before I show you this book, let me actually bring the other one, which is a really good design pattern book. API design. Oh, this one. This is the one. All right. This book right here, if you're using C++, man, get this book, Design Patterns. I was not showing you. Okay, this book right here, Design Patterns. This is a really good book. You need to get this book. You need to have it. It's a must when it comes to developing a game engine, right? It's a really good book. Now, if you are new to all this concept of design patterns, there's another book that I recommend you to read. Some people either hate it or they love it because they explain things in a kind of playful way, not very technical. Well, they are technical, but the way of how they explain things is very playful, right? And it's called, and it is this book, Head First Design Patterns. The only issue with this is that they use Java to explain how to work with this. And if you don't know Java, that's going to make things a little bit complicated. The cool thing that you don't really need to be an expert in Java. If you have some knowledge of C, you get most of what this book is talking about. Now, I read this book first. It helped me have a clear picture of design patterns and how to use them, and then I ended up reading this book. And once I read this book, everything changed. That's when I really actually was able to start. That's when my game engine started to actually work. Actually, let me show you something. If you go to my website, I do have this kind of a timeline where I show you like how when everything started. And the other day I was looking at this timeline and I recall, there you go. So here, June 2013, I started basically implementing the basic structure. But then, here, now, not too far from when I started, I realized that the whole game engine was a mess, and I had to redesign the whole game engine again. And that's when I basically, decided to really focus on design patterns. And that's when everything really, started to work. So that's what I wanted to talk about. If you guys have any more questions, let me know. If you don't have any right now, what I recommend you to do is you can go to my Discord channel, and just send me a message. You can go to my Twitter profile. I'm going to provide a link below in the description. Just ask me any questions you may have. If I do not know the answer, I do know that someone in that Discord channel will be able to answer it. We have several people working on their own game engine, so if I do not know something, I'm sure someone there will know the answer. So you have a question, just send me a message either through my website, or you can just type a question in my in the comments below. or just join my Discord channel and type your question and we can help you. All right, guys, this has been really good. I was a little bit nervous when I started because I haven't done a live stream in a long time. All right, so if no one has any other questions, thank you, Harlex. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Greenblade, for joining this live stream, and I'll see you guys next time.